Yeah, I'm just going to speed dry. I don't think there's much damp there still alive there, but I don't want any, so I want to make sure that what I do next, because I'm looking at putting on another wash now, going back to the big brush. So I don't want any areas. I don't want to come across something that's still wet. So I'm just cleaning off my brushes rather than let them dry out with paint in them. I'm going to put a little bit of color on this roof and a bit of color on that roof because I missed it. I could have done that when I was doing the wall, but I didn't. It's no biggie, but I just, in case you were wondering, let me just pick up the round brush, the smaller round brush this time. And I'm just going to use the same colors, raw sienna or burnt sienna, a little bit of alizarin crimson. And if I can do this with a single brush stroke, okay, this is sunshine. Look at that, sunshine, instant sunshine. That was one brush mark. See how it delivers in a broken fashion like that if you just use one brush mark. If you were to go over it a second time or a third time, you'd lose that texture. You wouldn't get it. It would look just overworked. I'm going to go up this roof the same way, but I'm going to follow the direction of the slope of the roof. I went straight across there because it's such a narrow shape that can be done with one brush mark. So whenever you get the opportunity to use one brush mark, go for it. But I couldn't have done it in one brush mark if I'd have done the same angle on this little roof as I'm about to do on the bigger roof, okay? So this has to be multiple, but you don't keep going over the same bit. Well, you try not to. You go once, twice, there's 3 there. And I still managed, I was a bit lucky. I managed to get little bit of dry brush in places, not as much as on that one, but that's okay. It's fine. And because they're the same color, I'm just going to pick up a little bit of alizarin crimson here and cool off the top of that roof with alizarin crimson. So it's sort of, I don't know, it just seems to be a better balance if you do something slightly different from this roof to that roof. Fingernail up there. Anyway, so now that I can see that sunshine color working there, I think it would make sense, wouldn't it, if we to show some more sunshine around. And if it's hitting these surfaces, then surely it's hitting the top of that wall there, like that. As I say, the photo again is not going to give you these ideas. You have to find those ideas. You have to say, well, if I was there, you know, or if somebody sort of showed me this, I don't know, described rather. If somebody described this scene, I'd think, oh, the sun was out and it was hitting the roofs. It's probably hitting other areas then as well. You just have to apply that sort of that stuff, you know, from just being in places like these. You know, the things that should be familiar to us from just being there. From that's not a great way of describing it. I apologize, but it's doing things we think should be there because of, you know, it would be familiar. I'm just warming that up now a little bit. A little bit of warmth up here. Anything that's, it looks as though the sun was probably coming from the left. There are some hints of shadows, particularly under this area here. So let's, yeah. So now I think I'll stick with this brush, this round brush. We'll go for a little bit of, sorry, I just picked up lemon yellow. Let's go for cadmium yellow because that's the one that's on the list. But into that, I'll show you exactly what I'm doing here. Here's my cadmium yellow that I'm mixing down here. Yes, there is a little bit of residue from this color here that I just put on, but that's okay. So there's a bit of cadmium yellow, but this green that we've got growing on the rocks, it's a cold green. So that's where my little bit of viridian, that's transparent green, is going to come in. Okay. it could be phthalo green that you've got. That's absolutely fine. But if you look at that yellow, we don't have to copy the color that's in the photo, of course, but I think that's something that it sort of, I think it works. I think it does work in this case. So if I'm gentle over these rocks, I won't move too much of those of the paint, the lines that I made when painting those rocky shapes. Just picked up more water in the brush because back here that'll get weaker, of course. That green color will get much weaker. Now we can see evidence of it over here. Occasionally it pops up on rocks in the river itself, in the flowing water. About here, I'm going to warm it up. So a bit more of the cadmium yellow. And we'll add a little bit of the raw sienna to that. And that will warm the seaweed up a little bit because it's closer. The color becomes more intense, more rich. That's not very evident in the photo either, but I know that that works for a painting. That's, you know, I think there's a lot in that statement. That it's what works in a painting. It's not necessarily what works in real life or from a photo. It's what works in a painting. That's far more important. Things in the real world don't always make for the best paintings. In fact, they often, with regularity, they don't make for a great painting. Okay, now we've got this bit, what I think is a bit of a problem area. This area here is a nondescript. It's nondescript in terms of texture. It's nondescript in terms of color. All that's good about it at the moment is its shape. It's a great shape. Okay, it's flat, and I think that's something, that's what we should pick up on most importantly. So don't go thinking, hang on, it's got that going for it. Don't go thinking you've got to busy it up. It's a peaceful area, just like the sky, and to a certain degree the water is. So leave it like that. So you just have to sort of play about with it for a moment. I'm just going to go with a bit of, I can see a bit of green. There's always a lot of green around, you know, for obvious reasons, around these places, lichens and seaweeds and algae. So let's go with this. So I've just put a little bit of this sort of color in there. I'll put, let's make it look pretty. Again, I'm back to that. It's what will make it a good painting, not necessarily what's being said in the photograph. And I'm going to go cool. I'm going to cool it all off. So I'm picking up some ultramarine blue here. I'm going to cool it off down here somewhere. At that. I can go up the wall with this now. Giving me an idea. Belly of the brush like this. What else can we do? We've got some white patches I need to think about. I could just do this, just pick up the, leave some water in this brush and just scrub now. So it just, all I'm doing is fusing, borrowing paint from the areas that I just delivered and just filling it in. There we are. Okay. A little bit of green maybe right down the end there. Anyway, I'm fiddling there. I've got some white paper areas here. I think I'll make it gray. I'll just ultramarine blue and raw sienna, and that will give me a gray. And we'll just gray that out. Not, you know, the eye's not going to be attracted by that type of gray, that neutral gray. We don't want people down in here in the corner. Why would we? Why would anybody want to study, you know, this area of a painting? So we make it grey. We make it uninteresting deliberately. I still got white areas around here. In the photo, there's a pale pinkness about this area. I think it's just stones again. It's just loose stones. So I'll pick up a very small amount of alizarin crimson, a little bit of blue there. Just, oops, show you what I'm doing. That's a little bit of alizarin crimson, a little bit of blue from somewhere else. This is why I don't clean my palette, because tomorrow's painting, I'll use this in areas of my painting. So that goes in here, something like that. I'm not worried whether that area looks like what it looks like in the photo. It's not an area that's going to attract your viewer anyway. So you don't, why worry about it? It's just filler. Right, now I think we shall move towards. So this is all drying still, and I'm pretty certain we'll come back to this in a moment. Do we do it now? Could do it now. So I'm getting ideas from the photo for this. I'm seeing what looks like heavier clumps of seaweed making the dark shapes in between the lighter areas. So why don't we, so not much water in the brush, okay? Take some Viridian or phthalo green, whichever it is you're using. Take some burnt sienna, and that'll give us a really dark green. Get it right. Phthalo is typical of all phthalo colors, whether it's phthalo blue, phthalo green. It doesn't like mixing, okay? It's not a party goer. It doesn't like mixing with other colors, so it's can be quite tricky to get a color that's a bit of the burnt sienna and a bit of the green itself. It just wants to say, I don't want to mix. I only want to be me. So you sometimes find yourself having to put so much burnt sienna in the mix that it completely changes all of a sudden, almost in the blink of an eye, from the green to the burnt sienna. And that's an interesting thing to know, because it's a valuable thing to know, because other colors mix beautifully. That's why ultramarine blue, that's why I keep them close on my palette in neighboring wells, is because I use them a lot. They mix well. You can change the tonal value and the temperature of these mixes all day long, and they mix well. Right, so here's that textural seaweed effect. Remember, there's not much not much water in this. I think it goes to about as far as about here, somewhere like that. If I wanted to, I could just water this down a bit. So I just put that brush in the water tub, and look at how much weaker that is, okay, and easier it is to move with the brush. But that would be too wet. It's the right strength now with the water and paint, but it's too wet. So take some of it out on some tissue, and that'll give me the same. It's suggesting the same weed as I've got in here that I did a moment ago, only further back. There, and probably over here in places, something like that. Okay, we're not far off the completion of this painting. I think I've got enough of this. Do I go back to some slightly darker stuff? Make that tricky mix again between Viridian and oh dear, burnt sienna. So I'm painting and thinking of something completely different. Yeah, if I'm not careful, I'll overdo that. It's a foreground, remember. So easy to sort of overdo foregrounds. The only thing I think I might do is just put a little bit more dark at the base of that wall. And this is the color that I've just been using. something like that. Okay, let's get to the water. Now the water, as I see it, it's like an indigo, isn't it? So why did I not put indigo color paint on the mix? If I see that as an indigo, blue indigo, why didn't I just use indigo paint? Well, I could have, but the thing is, when you learn a bit about paint and color, you realize that it's, if you can restrict your colors, it's better, because it makes you mix more, it educates you, it makes you learn a bit about what the materials you're using. Yeah, I could take the shortcut, I could use indigo blue and have done with it. But an indigo blue is the only other downside to that is that indigo blue is just one color. If you can mix a color from more than one color, it's always a better color, because you can infer subtle nuances in that color. Right, so let's go with ultramarine blue, phthalo blue, and what'll give it the indigo, what'll make it go indigo here is the addition of burnt sienna. Okay, so that was ultramarine blue, phthalo blue, and it'll remain blue with just those colors, but the minute you put a smaller amount of burnt sienna in it, you will get indigo. You'll get a color more closer to indigo. Right, let's see if we can paint this fairly quickly. Now up here is a pale area where my finger is, because it's getting a lot of light if you look. Okay, again, this is where the photo is coming in useful. So I'm going to go dark mostly up this edge like this. Did leave a couple of stones in the water. Now that I've made that delivery, and I will warm this area up with, so I'm picking up a little bit more of the burnt sienna here for this stretch of water, because like everything, where it's closer to us, so therefore it's going to look a bit warmer. And then it cuts in something like this, right up to our, right up into this edge here. So notice on my delivery is, I'm going in all directions, because if you can do that while it's all still very wet, there's a lot of paint and a lot of water in that mix. Now, you know, there is that method we use for other conditions, which I can use a little bit. I've just cleaned this brush and made it flat like a paddle. If I hold it against my paper, you can see exactly what I mean. I've squeezed the fibers together and it forms like a paddle. Now, this is still a bit wet, so why don't I just drag that wet paint over there, and it'll give that effect of water, moving water back there like that. Okay. But from about this point back now, I don't see that area of water as being as that textured. So I'm just going to fill it in with a slightly weaker mix of what I used on the left-hand side originally. So just now is, you know, these are the few times I will actually use the point of the brush. Don't use the point of the brush much at all. I'm going to take a little bit of water on my fingertips like this and just flick it into the water there. It just infers a sort of movement, bubbling effect of moving water. Now, so many things you can do when painting water. You don't need to do all of them in the same painting, but you can do quite a few of them. And I'll show you a couple of things now. I showed you a few already, you know, sort of the dryer brush with the paddle, the brush formed into a paddle, the flicking of water into here. But you can also, of course, just pull things out. So if I take the flat brush, the 1-inch flat, and I've dunked it in the water just so that because it's damp, it'll receive it'll take water off this better. So I've squeezed all the water out, and it's a blade-like brush. Okay, when it's squeezed together, this is not a wash brush. You cannot do that with a wash brush. And what that allows me to do is just take out the odd light like that. I wouldn't do too much of that here because it's not that sort of scene. It's not like we're trying to create a calm boating pond, duck pond. This is better suited to sort of areas of strong color and broken texture. Now the distant water, I don't pay that much attention. I'll show you what I'm picking up here. I'm using the flat brush. There's some bluish sort of color here. I'll absolutely flood it out, weaken it out with water. And then I'll hold my breath, hold the blade of this brush parallel to the horizon line back there, but I'll leave a lot of light in there too. So I'm just occasionally hitting the paper like that. And I've made mine not as dark as the the photo back there. That's up to you. You know, if you want to make it, if you want to suggest it's slightly darker on the horizon back there, you can. But we don't, the thing is, we don't really, it's no wonder, I think, sometimes that we don't observe these things. We simply don't. When we're on a beach, probably the last thing we're thinking of is that, oh, that funny little line that I can see out there is the curvature of the planet, is the disappearing line, is the horizon line. We're more concerned about throwing a ball for the dog or playing with the kids or just taking a stroll. But that's, so if it's not in our mind, if it's not uppermost in our mind, it becomes a less important thing to paint, to include in your painting. But again, the caveat here is that you must be aware of it. You must know it's there. Right. So far, I think all we've got to do now is put a bit of shadow on this painting and we're done. So I'm mixing up ultramarine blue. I always make a lot of this, and I usually use, as I'm doing here, both of these mixing areas, because I can always keep one stronger than the other, or one warmer than the other. It's ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, like this. I need more water. And you should be quite familiar with this method of mine now. So I've made my mix. I keep my fingers crossed that the mix is correct, because you can never be absolutely sure until it goes on the painting. And the other thing I do, of course, is that I pull off 3 or 4 sheets of paper. I scrumple it up, form a face like that, held in my hand. If I don't like anything, it comes straight off. Okay. Right. So I'm going to start. If I make this upper mixing area slightly weaker, that's to say it's got more water in it, then that's playing safe. As the sun's coming from here, we'd expect that side of the house. We can't see much of it, but it's there. Expect that side of the house to be shadowed. And I think there's a hint of a shadow on the edge of that roof there. But if I put that in, I'm not sure whether that will lose some of the dynamics there. I think that's a bit dark, a bit strong. So down tools, don't just say, oh, I've done it again. That sort of, I've done it again. I'm always doing this. And just put up with it. Just down tools and say, okay, you recognize the fact that you've possibly made your shadow too strong. Do something about it. Don't carry on regardless. That's where the mistake is. I think we just think I've made a mistake, that's typical me, and just think that's the only answer. Now down tools, put a bit more water in that in that shadow, remix it. Now I can always soften that in a moment. What I do see is a strong shadow under here, like this. And maybe there's a bit of shadow there. I always like to put a little bit of warmth in my shadows. So a bit of burnt sienna on another brush here. Try to match, when you're putting a bit of warmth in your shadow, try to match the strength of paint. It's not very good if you have a wetter bit of warm paint going into something that's a bit drier. I should have taken that further along like that. So there is, as you'd expect, that shadow, that wall there to be shadowed. Now, I don't like the fact that there's no shadow on the roof. So I don't think that looks right. It all looks a little too contrived. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shadow some of that roof, because there's clouds up there, we can see them. Okay, so we can say that some of that roof is shadowed off like that. Get rid of some of that. The shadow edges will be mostly hard, because it's the, roofs and walls are hard surfaces, but I always like to soften somewhere, just a little percentage of softness, small percentage of softness to those edges. Let's take that out, lighten it up a bit, lighten the shadow at the back of the roof down there, because colors and tonal values weaken the further they are away from us. So the back part of that roof will be lighter than this near part of the roof. Most of this is under shadow, but I'll try to leave a slither of light on top of the wall, the wall of the harbour here. Tiny bit of light at the end of the building. And again, unlike the photo that's got a shadow over that end, I don't want to lose the contrast between that and that. So I'm going to shadow off that part. That would make sense, wouldn't it? Because we've got a shadow at this side of the roof, and we would have, you'd think, a shadow up here on that roof on the same angle. Again, a little delivery of warmth somewhere. Think now this must be shadow. I always think, oh, am I overdoing the shadow? Is it getting a little too overshadowed? But you've committed to something, just making certain areas lighter. You've committed to something, and often you just have to stick with it. Just warm it up a little bit here. So diagonal shadow, diagonals. Sorry, I'll speak more clearly. Diagonal edges in shadows are good if you can think of the shapes that are cast in these things are a long way off up there in the sky. So those objects, those clouds, whatever they are that are throwing the shadow, won't be square things. They'll be broken effects. I think we've got to have a shadow on there. So take your time with this. It's just it's no rush. You've made the mix. You've got everything else set up. Just take your time to think it out. I could put shadow across here, and I probably will, because shadow in the foreground can be really good. But what if we just allow some of those rocks to take some light? So I'm thinking edges of these boulders that I've created receiving some light, something like that, and then shadow can come up here like this. And I think we're done. I think we're done. You should, I mean, I managed to get a color when I was painting this left-hand side that looks like it's been shadowed already in shadow. So I think we'll leave that mostly as it is. I think we're there. There's probably a little bit of shadow under the eaves here on this side. That, to a lesser extent there. And I'm going to put the mount around it now. I usually put the mount around a bit earlier than this, to be honest, but things do sort of escape your mind a little bit, concentration and things. In fact, what I'm seeing, even before I put the mount around it, is that I think, because this is such a different color, some of that shadow has got to be reflected in that water. So I'll just pick up the shadow color again from my palette here, and we'll just bring that color into places. Look a bit odd otherwise if you one color sat alone. Right, let's put that mount around it and see what we got here. Yeah, it's fairly loose. You know, I've painted looser paintings, probably painted tighter paintings. I'll just finish off with a little embellishment. Probably guessed what that is by now. Just pick up a little bit of burnt sienna and add to the shadow color, and we just tap some texture into here. Take some white gouache next with the rigger brush. I'll take my gouache directly from the tube. A lot of water in this brush, in this rigger brush, just before I put it in the paint. Just spatter some of that texture in areas, but also use this now to just perhaps run the odd highlight here and there. Maybe just a hint of a window frame in places. Over here, a little bit of light glimmering through the shadow in places. A mooring rope down off the wall here. As I say, put yourself there. You know, if you're struggling to sort of invent, all you have to do is put yourself there. You know, imagine you've been to this place or somewhere very similar. It's going to have the same traits, whether this is a coastline in the northeast, whether it's a coastline, you know, southwest, Scotland, wherever, Ireland, they will have a lot of very similar symbols and characteristics. Right, I think we'll call it a done job here, folks. I could just play around and fiddle, probably too much. Go across the water with the odd sparkle of light there. Now put the mount around it and let the poor thing have a rest from me. There we are. I'll worry about whether it's any good later. You know, it's another painting. I love the process, in fact. If anything, I'm quite sad when I get to the end of a painting, because the enjoyment stops. The only remedy to that is to do another painting. But there is, I don't always make a decision on whether it's any good as soon as it's finished.